She didn't scream. She was too far gone for that. When Caleb Turner kicked open the door of that abandoned logging cabin, he expected to find nothing but rotting wood and old snow. Instead, he found a girl curled against the far wall like a dying animal. Bruised face, cracked lips, wrists rubbed raw and wrapped in blood-stiff cloth eyes so hollow they barely registered light. She looked up at him, and in a voice barely louder than the storm outside, she said the only thing she had left. "Please, don't make me go back." If this story moved something in you, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end, because what happens next will break your heart before it puts it back together. And drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now, let's begin. Caleb Turner was not a man who believed in signs. He believed in fences that held cattle that didn't wander, and sky that told you the truth about the coming weather. He believed in hard work and harder silence, in the kind of grief that didn't speak, because speaking didn't change anything. 3 years on this side of losing Ruth, and he'd gotten used to the quiet the way a man gets used to a missing limb, not comfortable with it, not healed from it, just functional enough to keep moving forward without thinking too hard about what was gone. He almost didn't go near the old cabin. The eastern fence needed checking before the storm swallowed the last of the daylight, and the abandoned logging cabin sat a quarter-mile out of his way. Collapsed on one side, nobody in it for years, nothing worth checking on. But something made him pull the horse that direction. He couldn't have explained it. He wasn't the kind of man who put stock in intuition or providence, or the idea that the world arranged itself to give you chances. He just turned the horse and rode. He heard the sound before he saw the door. Not a scream. Not even a cry. Something quieter and worse than both the sound a flame makes in the last second before it goes dark. Something small and desperate and nearly finished. He was off his horse before it stopped moving. The door came apart when he hit it, old wood and rusted hinges giving way in one motion, and the smell hit him first. Cold and rot, and something iron-sharp that he recognized from the war, from slaughterhouses, from places where men did things to other living things that couldn't be undone. Then he saw her. She was pressed into the far corner, curled up small as a child, her body making itself as little as possible, the way animals do when they've learned that being seen is how you get hurt. She wore what had once been a dress and was now torn, tatters against skin that had no color left in it. Her wrists were wrapped in cloth gone dark and stiff with dried blood. Her face was bruised in colors that told him immediately not from a fall, not from an accident. This was deliberate. This was practiced. This was someone's repeated intentional work. She flinched when the door broke open, threw both arms over her head, and turned her face to the wall. Caleb went completely still. "Hey," he said. Just that word spoken as quiet as he knew how. "Hey, I ain't going to hurt you." She didn't move. I didn't go closer. He just crouched down, slow and deliberate, making himself smaller, putting his eyes at her level. And he waited. The wind screamed outside. Snow ticked against the broken walls like something trying to get in. A long, terrible silence stretched between them in that frozen, rotting cabin, and Caleb Turner held himself perfectly still inside it. Slowly, by degrees, her arms came down an inch. One eye appeared from behind them. Dark, glassy, almost past the point of sight. It found him and fixed on him with the particular look of a creature that has stopped believing in rescue, but hasn't quite stopped breathing. "Please." The word came out cracked and thin as old ice. "Please, don't make me go back." He looked at this girl, because that's what she was. Barely more than a girl, 20 years old, at the very outside, thin as a winter branch, and twice as brittle, and something in his chest that had been sealed for 3 years broke open just enough, just wide enough to let those 5 words all the way in. "Go back where, miss?" he asked. She pressed her lips together. The eye closed. Like the answer was something she'd been carrying for a long time and hadn't yet decided to set down. "The camp," she whispered. He didn't ask which camp. He didn't push. "What's your name?" A silence so long he started to think she'd forgotten. Then Clara. Clara Bennett. "All right, Clara Bennett." He kept his voice the same low, even the tone he used with horses that had been badly handled. "My name's Caleb Turner. I've got a ranch about 2 miles north of here. I'm going to get you out of this cold, get you some food, get somebody to look at those wrists. That's all, just that. She looked at him. Really looked the way people look when they've been wrong about everything for so long that they don't trust their own eyes anymore. Why? She said. Such a bare, honest word. Such a small, devastating question. He sat with it for a moment. Because nobody should die in a place like this, he said. And you're close enough to it that it frightens me. Something moved across her face then. Not hope. Hope was too big, too fragile a thing for what was in her eyes. More like the ghost of it. The memory of what hope had felt like before she'd learned to stop reaching for it. What if they come looking? She said. Her voice had gotten a fraction stronger. The question came out urgent, pressed forward. When they find I'm gone, they'll send men. They always send men. And when they get here, what they do to the people who help us, you don't know. You don't understand what they... She stopped, pushed her fist against her mouth. There was a man in Crenshaw County, a farmer. He hid one of the other girls for 2 days. She didn't finish that sentence. She didn't have to. Miss Clara. He waited until her eye came back to him. I'm 61 years old. I've buried a wife, 2 friends, and a way of life I thought would last forever. There ain't much left in this world that has any power to frighten me. She stared at him. Can you stand? He asked. She tried. Her legs gave out before she'd straightened fully, and he stepped forward without thinking and caught her. Just caught her and felt how little there was of her. Bones and cold skin, and a grip that seized on the sleeve of his coat, like it was the last solid thing in the entire world. I've got you, he said. She didn't let go of his sleeve the whole ride back. Dr. Evelyn Brooks did not look like a woman who frightened easily because she wasn't one. She was 53 years old, with sharp eyes and capable hands, and 20 years of practicing medicine in a town that had spent all 20 of those years trying to convince her she shouldn't. She had outlasted 2 sheriffs, 4 mayors, a medical board challenge, and more quiet daily contempt than any person ought to carry, and she'd done it by being simply relentlessly better than what anyone expected. She answered Caleb's knock at midnight without surprise, looked at what he was carrying, and stepped aside. Bring her in, she said. Clara let herself be guided to the examining table, but her grip on Caleb's sleeve tightened the moment he tried to step back. It's all right, he said. I don't... She stopped. Her jaw was working. I don't know her. Evelyn crouched down to Clara's eye level, the same way Caleb had done in the cabin, and said in a voice that was both firm and gentle as a bandage. My name is Evelyn Brooks. I'm a doctor. I am going to help you. That's the only thing I'm going to do. Something about a woman's voice. Something about the word help spoken without condition or price attached to it. Clara let go. Evelyn worked for a long time. Caleb stood in the corner and kept himself quiet and out of the way, which was the most useful thing he could think to do. The fire spoke. The storm pressed against the windows. Outside, Harlan's Creek slept in ordinary darkness, without knowing what was happening in the doctor's house in the middle of the night. Evelyn came and stood beside him when she finished, keeping her voice low. Malnourished. 3 toes on the left foot showing early frostbite. We caught it in time. The wrists will heal. The ribs. She paused. When she started again, her voice had taken on a particular quality, the way iron takes on a quality when it's been heated through. Some of those ribs were broken and healed wrong, which means they were broken and nobody treated them. That takes time. That takes months of nobody doing anything. She looked at Caleb directly. This didn't start recently. No, he said. She said 3 years. Evelyn was quiet for a moment. Then, what do we do? Right now we do what you said. We keep her warm. We feed her. We let her sleep somewhere she doesn't have to be afraid. He looked at Clara across the room, already half asleep, sitting up her body, surrendering to warmth and safety, with the desperation of something starved for both. Then we find out what she knows. In the morning, Clara ate 3 bowls of broth and said nothing for 2 full hours. Then in pieces slowly, the way someone dismantles a thing they've been holding together by sheer will, she began to talk. She'd been 17 when they took her. Not dragged off a street, it hadn't been that simple, or that clean. Her father had died the winter before. Her mother was sick. The money was gone. And then a man came through their small town in Idaho with papers and a smile and a practiced reasonable story about labor contracts for women at the mining operations. Good wages, honest work, a way to send money home every month. I thought I was saving my mother, Clara said. She was sitting up a quilt around her shoulders holding a tin cup with both hands, the way people hold things they need to feel solid. I thought I was doing something right. I signed the papers. I got in the wagon. She stared down into the cup. By the time I understood what I'd walked into, I was 4 states away, and there wasn't a single person within 100 miles who was going to do anything about it. Who runs the operation? Caleb asked. A man named Victor Grayson. She said the name flat and hard, setting it on the table between them like something she'd been carrying for a long time and was now choosing to put down. He owns 3 mining operations and 2 labor ranches across the territory. He has lawyers. He has men. He has an arrangement with the sheriff in Millhaven County, and at least 2 others I know of by name. She looked up. He has documentation for every girl in those camps, signed contracts, employment records, receipts. A 17-year-old girl's signature doesn't make a fraudulent contract legal, Evelyn said from across the room. His lawyers say it does, Clara said. And he has enough money to keep saying it until someone believes it. Caleb leaned forward. Are there others still in the camp? Clara's face changed. 3, she said. The word came out stripped of everything except weight. 3 women still in the camp. One of them... She stopped, swallowed. When she looked up, something in her eyes had shifted something harder, more resolute. The look of a woman who has been living with an unbearable fact for months and has decided she will not look away from it anymore. One of them is 15 years old. Her name is May. She cried every night for the first 2 months. Now she doesn't cry anymore. Clara's voice was level and terrible. That's worse. That is so much worse. The silence that followed was of a different quality from all the silences before it. Evelyn turned to face the window. Caleb said, "We're going to get them out." Clara looked at him with those old, careful eyes. "You say that like it's simple." "It ain't simple," he said. "But that doesn't change what we're going to do." Victor Grayson's men arrived in Harlan's Creek on the 3rd day. 4 of them riding in like they owned the road, led by a man who went by Drum, broad-shouldered, easy-smiling, wearing a badge that hadn't been issued by any lawful authority in the Montana Territory. The kind of badge that got made in the back of a gun shop and existed mainly to give violent men a convenient explanation for what they were already planning. Caleb was already in the sheriff's office when they walked through the door. He'd been there since first light, sitting across from Sheriff Leland Hadley, while his coffee went cold between them, explaining everything carefully, completely without embellishment, because the truth was terrible enough on its own. He watched Hadley's face while he talked. Watched the discomfort move through it, the calculations, the quiet weighing of what kind of man he wanted to be against, what kind of trouble this was going to cost. Hadley sat with his hands folded on the desk for a long time after Caleb finished. "You understand what you're asking of me," he said finally. "I'm asking you to do your job," Caleb said, "which is protecting people in this town. Clara Bennett is in this town. 3 more girls are somewhere in this territory waiting to find out if anybody cares whether they live or die. Grayson has lawyers, Caleb, real ones with real connections to the territorial governor's office. If I move on him without solid legal ground, he'll have me removed from this office before spring and replace me with someone who won't ask questions." Hadley rubbed his face. "That doesn't help those girls." "Then what does—" Hadley opened his mouth to answer. The door opened. Drum walked in with his 3 men behind him, and that practiced, pleasant expression on his face. The expression of a man who had never had to worry much about the answer being no. "Morning, Sheriff. I'm looking for a young woman by the name of Clara Bennett. We have documentation indicating she's in breach of a valid labor contract and is required to return to her employer's custody." He set a folded paper on the desk with the smooth confidence of a man who'd done this many times and had every reason to expect it to work again. "If you could point us in the right direction, we'll be out of your town by nightfall." Hadley stood up from his chair. He was not a large man, but he had a quality of stillness that took up space. He looked at the paper on his desk without touching it. Drum looked at Caleb for the first time. "This a family matter of yours, old-timer?" "Clara Bennett is a person in this town," Caleb said. "That makes it everybody's business." "I see." Drum's voice didn't change. That was the thing about men like Drum, they didn't threaten loud. They threatened with the particular quiet of someone who'd done this enough times to know they didn't have to raise their voice. "Mr. Grayson has been very patient about this situation. His patience does have limits naturally." Caleb looked at him straight. "I imagine it does." Hadley picked up the paper, looked at it, set it down. "I'll need our town's legal counsel to review this documentation before I can act on it. You're welcome to wait at the hotel down the street." He met Drum's eyes. "And I'd ask you and your men to keep your weapons holstered while you're guests in Harlan's Creek. We're a peaceful community." Drum smiled. The smile didn't reach his eyes by a wide margin. "Of course, Sheriff. We're peaceful men." When they were gone, Hadley looked at Caleb. "That contract is real enough to cause trouble regardless of how it was obtained. Her signature is on it. Grayson's lawyers will argue she lied about her age. They'll argue it was consensual. They'll keep arguing it until they find a judge who agrees. What do we need? Evidence. Documentation. A witness who can testify from inside that operation." Hadley lowered his voice. "And not with Drum's men watching every door in this town." Caleb walked back to Evelyn's house and found Clara standing at the front window watching Drum's men move through the street below. She didn't turn when he came in. She'd already understood. "They're here," she said. "They're here." The sheriff didn't. "Hadley's buying time. He needs evidence. He is not handing you over, Clara." She was quiet for a moment. Men like Drum don't wait long. "No, they don't." She turned then and looked at him. And for the first time since he'd found her in that cabin, something shifted in her face that he couldn't entirely name. Something that lived in the space between exhaustion and the very earliest, most fragile beginning of anger. Not the panicked, reactive kind, but the slow, cold kind that builds in people who have been patient about injustice for so long that patience stops being a virtue and starts being a decision. "I'm not going back," she said. Not to him. More like a thing said out loud to make it real. A door closed from the inside. "No," Caleb said. "You're not." That evening, without planning or announcement, things began to shift in Harlan's Creek. It started with Moses Alcott the blacksmith. He'd seen Drum's men ride in and had recognized something in their posture. The specific entitlement of men who'd been told the law was on their side and knew exactly how to use that belief. Moses had a long memory and a good sense for what men like that usually did next. He showed up at Evelyn's door at supper time with a crate his wife had packed and set it on the porch without saying much of anything. "Heard you might have a guest needs looking after," he said. "Margaret sent bread and a jar of preserves." He looked at Caleb, looked at the door behind him, nodded once, and left. Then Harriet Cobb came. She was 70 years old, small and steady, and she'd lost her daughter 11 years before in circumstances the town didn't speak of openly, but that everyone understood. She sat with Clara for an hour and didn't ask questions, didn't offer explanations, just sat. Just let Clara feel what it was to have someone in the room who understood at the bone level what it meant to have had someone taken. When Harriet left, Clara sat without moving for a long time. "She lost someone," she said quietly. Not a question. "Yes," Evelyn said. "Did anyone answer for it?" Evelyn was quiet. "He moved on," she said finally. "Made his money elsewhere. Never faced a consequence." Clara looked down at her bandaged hands, at the evidence of 3 years written into her skin. She turned her hands over slowly, studying them the way someone studies a thing they've decided to understand differently. "Not this time," she said, quiet but certain, like a door being locked. "Not this time." And somewhere beneath the exhaustion and the fear and the 3 years of surviving things, no person should have had to survive something gathered in Clara Bennett's eyes. Something hardened. Something that looked, if you knew what to look for, exactly like a woman who had made a decision. She was done being someone else's story. That night, Caleb sat on Evelyn's cold porch and looked at the sky the way he hadn't let himself look at it in 3 years. The storm had broken, and the stars were out sharp and indifferent and extraordinary, the way Montana stars always were after a storm cleared. Ruth used to say, the stars were God's way of reminding you how small your problems were. He'd always argued with her. Most problems, he'd said, don't feel small from the inside. She'd laughed. Lord, she could laugh. I thought about Clara sleeping inside. Sleeping for the first time and he didn't know how long somewhere no one could touch her. He thought about May, 15 years old in a camp 2 counties away, who had stopped crying because she'd learned it didn't help. He thought about Drum comfortable in the hotel 2 streets over, certain of his own outcome. He thought about what Ruth would have done. He knew the answer to that immediately. Ruth would have been the first one through the door. He stood up, settled his hat, and went inside. Tomorrow was going to ask everything of him, every bit of stubbornness, every ounce of whatever courage was left in a 61-year-old man who'd buried most of what mattered and was still standing. Standing on that porch under those cold Montana stars, he made himself one quiet private promise. Whatever it cost him, Clara Bennett was not going back, and neither were those 3 other women. Not while he had breath in him, not while he had anything left to give. He was going to need the whole town. He was going to need Hadley. He was going to need evidence and witnesses and the kind of luck that usually didn't come looking for retired ranchers in the middle of Montana winters. But tonight in the dark and the cold, with a girl sleeping safely. For the first time in 3 years, on the other side of that wall, Caleb Turner made his peace with the cost of whatever came next. Some things he'd learned were worth whatever they cost. Clara Bennett, all 20 years of her survival and stubbornness and cracked enduring life, was worth everything. Drum's men didn't leave. That was the first thing Caleb noticed when he stepped out before dawn the next morning. 2 of them still posted at the far end of the street, drinking coffee like they had all the patience in the world, like waiting was something they'd done enough times to get good at. They weren't hiding. They wanted to be seen. That was the point. That was the message. We're here. We're watching. And we're not going anywhere until we get what we came for. Caleb walked to the sheriff's office without hurrying. Hadley was already at his desk, a letter in his hand, his face carrying the expression of a man who'd received bad news before breakfast and hadn't yet decided how to live with it. What is it? Caleb said. Hadley set the letter face down on the desk. Got a telegraph from the county seat this morning. Judge Alderman has reviewed Grayson's contract documentation and issued a preliminary order directing this office to return Clara Bennett to the custody of Grayson Mining and Labor while the employment dispute is formally reviewed. He looked up. That order arrived at 5 this morning. Drum's already been informed. Caleb felt something cold move through him that had nothing to do with the temperature outside. That order isn't worth the paper it's on, he said. She was 17. She was deceived. I know that. Then, I know that, Hadley said again harder. But Alderman doesn't see it that way. And Alderman is the judge, and I am the sheriff. And what I know personally, and what I can act on legally, are 2 very different things right now. He stood up, moved to the window. I've got maybe 2 days before Drum walks in here with that order, and I'm legally obligated to act on it. Maybe less. Then we need something in 2 days. What I need, Hadley said, turning, is a witness. Someone who was inside that camp. Someone who can testify under oath about what's happening in there. Clara alone, her word against Grayson's lawyers, that's not enough. But if there's another woman, if we can get one of those other 3 out before... You're talking about raiding the camp. I'm talking about giving someone the chance to walk out on their own. Hadley met his eyes. There's a difference. Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I need to talk to Clara. She was awake when he got back. Sitting at Evelyn's kitchen table with a cup of coffee, she wasn't drinking. Watching the steam rise from it like she was working something out in her head. She'd gotten color back in her face in the last 24 hours. Not much, but some. She looked up when Caleb came in. Read his face the way people who've survived difficult things learn to read faces. It's bad, she said. A judge has issued a preliminary order. Drum knows about it. Hadley has 2 days before he's legally required to enforce it. She set the cup down. I told you. You did. I told you they had judges. I told you they had the law. Her voice didn't break. It just went flat the way voices go when emotion gets compressed into something small and manageable. This is what they do. They don't grab you off the street. They make it legal. They make it look like you're the problem. Caleb pulled out a chair and sat across from her. Is there anything inside that camp documents, records, evidence of what they're actually doing, as opposed to what the contracts say? Clara was quiet for a moment. Grayson keeps books, she said slowly. Caleb went still. He keeps books on everything, Clara said. How much each girl earns against her contract debt, what the debt is, how it compounds. He showed me mine once to explain why I could never leave. She looked at her hands. He was proud of it, the mathematics of it, like it was clever. Where does he keep them? His private office at the main camp, locked cabinet on the east wall. She paused. But you can't get to that camp without being seen. He's got 4 men on rotation, dogs on the perimeter, and after I ran... She stopped. Something moved across her face. After I ran, he'll have added more. Is there anyone still inside who would help? Clara went very still. There's a woman named Ruth. She started, then caught herself. Her eyes moved to Caleb. Her name is Ruth. She's been there longer than any of us. She knows where everything is. She's the one who helped me get out. She looked down. She stayed behind because of May. She wouldn't leave without the girl. Then we need to get word to her. How you can't exactly walk up to the front gate. Caleb leaned forward. Is there anyone who moves between the camp and town that Ruth would trust, a delivery man, a supply rider, anyone with legitimate access? Clara thought for a moment. Then something shifted in her eyes, the particular look of someone remembering a detail they'd tried hard to forget. There's a man named Cord Hatch, she said. He delivers dry goods to the camp twice a month. He knows what happens in there. He knows and he does nothing, and he takes Grayson's money and rides away. Her voice had gone cold. But he's afraid of Grayson. Terrified. People who are terrified can be convinced, Caleb said. Or they can run straight to drum the moment you approach them, Clara said flatly. You don't know which kind of afraid he is. No, Caleb admitted, but I'm going to find out. Cord Hatch worked out of the livery stable on the north end of town, and Caleb found him there an hour later, doing exactly what a man with something to hide does, keeping his head down and his hands busy and his eyes anywhere except on the people around him. He was maybe 40, wiry, with the kind of face that had done a lot of calculating over the years. When Caleb walked in, Cord knew immediately. The shoulders said it. The way he set down what he was holding said it. I don't know anything about any woman, Cord said before Caleb had opened his mouth. I haven't asked you anything yet. I can guess what you're going to ask. Cord turned. His eyes were quick and frightened in the way of small animals that understand what larger ones are capable of. Whatever you think I know, I don't. Whatever you think I saw out there, I didn't. I make deliveries. That's all. Cord. Caleb's voice was quiet. There's a 15-year-old girl in that camp. Cord's hands stopped moving. Her name is May, Caleb said. She's been there for 8 months. She stopped crying about 6 months ago. You've been delivering to that camp for how long? 2 years. 3. Don't, Cord said. How many times did you look away? Don't do that to me. The man's voice cracked suddenly, a sharp, unexpected sound. You don't think I know. You don't think I go home and... He stopped. His jaw worked. You think I haven't tried to figure out what I could do, what I could actually do against a man like Grayson without ending up in the ground. Now, Caleb said, you don't have to do it alone. A silence. There's a woman inside that camp named Ruth, Caleb said. I need to get a message to her. That's all I'm asking right now. Can you do that? Cord looked at him for a long, measuring moment. The fear in his face hadn't left. But something else had come into it. Something ragged and long delayed, the look of a man who's been carrying a weight that didn't belong to him for so long, he'd forgotten what it felt like to put it down. Next delivery is day after tomorrow, Cord said. I need it sooner. Tomorrow morning, Cord said. He picked up what he'd put down. His hands weren't steady. You'll have your message delivered by noon. It was Evelyn who told Clara about the girl. She didn't plan to. She'd intended to say nothing until they were further along, until the situation was more stable, until Clara had more ground under her feet. But Clara asked directly, with those careful, unwavering eyes that didn't look away from things, and Evelyn had never been a woman who could lie well to someone who deserved the truth. You said one girl died trying to escape, Clara said. It wasn't a question. When I was telling you everything about the camp, you wrote it down. But your face changed when I said that. It changed before I got to the rest of it. She paused. Who was she? Evelyn was quiet for a long time. A girl came through Harlan's Creek about 14 months ago, she said. She'd gotten out somehow, I still don't know how. She was in bad shape. She came to me. She stopped, started again. I treated her. I fed her. I asked Hadley for help. And Hadley... Another pause. Hadley was different then. More afraid. He told me he couldn't take on Grayson without evidence. He told me she needed to wait. He was going to look into it, he said. Quietly. And Clara's voice was absolutely level. Drum's men found her the next morning, Evelyn said. She was gone before I reached her. She looked at her own hands. She was 19 years old. Her name was Anna. The silence that followed was enormous. Clara didn't cry. She sat with it, breathed through it, let it settle into its proper, terrible place. That's why Hadley is different now, she said finally. That's why he listened to Caleb. Yes, Evelyn said. He's been living with Anna for 14 months. So have I. Clara looked up. She's why you didn't turn me away in the middle of the night. Evelyn met her eyes. She's why I opened the door. Something passed between them too large and too specific to be named, the particular bond of women who understand each other's wounds without requiring explanation. Then her death mattered, Clara said quietly. If it led here, if it led to this, then it mattered. I believe that, Evelyn said. I have to believe that. So do I. Clara straightened, set her shoulders. The woman who had arrived here 2 nights ago, unable to stand on her own feet, squared herself against what was coming with the particular resolve of someone who has run out of things to lose. Then let's make sure it counts for something. Victor Grayson arrived in Harlan's Creek at 3 in the afternoon. Caleb found out from Moses, who came to the door of Evelyn's house with his hammer still in his hand, and the expression of a man who'd seen the devil ride in from the south end of town on a very good horse. He's here himself, Moses said. Grayson came in with 2 more men and a lawyer, checked into the hotel, asked for the best room. He paused. Asked the hotel boy to tell the sheriff he'd be pleased to discuss the matter over supper tonight. Very polite about it. Caleb looked at him. What kind of man is he? I've seen his type before, Moses said. The kind that smile while they're doing it. The kind that never raise their voice because they've never needed to. He turned his hammer in his hands. The kind that scare me more than the ones who shout. Caleb went to find Hadley. He found him already walking back from the hotel, his face carefully neutral in the way of men who've just had a conversation they need time to process. He's reasonable, Hadley said before Caleb could speak. That's the problem. He came in talking about misunderstandings and proper legal channels and how he just wants what's fair for everyone involved. He stopped walking. He called Clara a troubled young woman who needs proper guidance, said he was concerned about her welfare. The fury that moved through Caleb at those words was quieter and more dangerous than anger. He said that, with a smile on his face and a lawyer sitting right beside him. Hadley looked at the hotel across the street. He's not what you expect, Caleb. He doesn't look like what he is. That's how he's gotten this far. What does he want? Clara, and whatever she might have told us. He wants to know how much we know and whether we can prove it. Hadley turned. He's not afraid. That's what worries me. A guilty man should be at least a little afraid. He's not. He's been doing this for years and nobody stopped him, Caleb said. He's got no reason to be afraid. Yet, Hadley said. Clara was the one who saw Grayson from the upstairs window. She'd been standing back from it, careful, watching the street the way someone watches a river they know has hidden currents. When the hotel door opened and Grayson stepped out onto the boardwalk in his good coat and his easy posture, she went absolutely still. Caleb saw it happen. He was across the room, and he watched it move through her, not collapse, not panic. Something colder than that. Something that started in her chest and moved outward until her face was completely, deliberately blank. "That's him," she said. Her voice was flat as stone. "You don't have to. I know what he's doing right now," she said. She didn't look away from the window. "He's deciding whether to handle this quietly or make an example. He does that calculation every time." She watched Grayson speak to someone on the boardwalk, watched him laugh at something. Watched him be exactly as charming and unremarkable as a businessman having a pleasant afternoon. "When I first got to the camp, I thought he was kind. I thought there'd been a mistake. He spoke to me for 20 minutes about Montana and the work and how well things would go if we all cooperated." She paused. "It was 6 hours later that I understood what I was in. Clara. He does it on purpose," she said. "The kindness first. He wants you to feel the gap between what you thought and what's real. He wants it to break something in you." She finally turned from the window. Her eyes were clear and dry and furious in the contained, precise way of someone who has made a decision about exactly how much power another person is going to have over her. "It doesn't work anymore. I want him to know that." "He will," Caleb said. "I want to be the one who tells him." The room went quiet. Evelyn looked up from across the space. Even the fire seemed to pause. "Not yet," Caleb said carefully. "We need Cord to get the message through. We need Ruth. We need what's in that locked cabinet. You walk out there now with nothing but your word against his lawyers and his judges and his documentation." "I know," Clara said. She turned back to the window. Grayson had gone back inside. The street was ordinary again. "I know. I'm not saying now." She pressed her fingertips flat against the glass. "I'm saying eventually. I'm saying before this is done, I want to stand in front of that man and say my name out loud." She looked at her own reflection in the glass. "And I want everyone in this town to hear it." Downstairs, somewhere in the house, a floorboard creaked. A door opened. Someone knocked. Ordinary sounds. The sounds of a town still deciding what kind of town it wanted to be. And in the hotel across the street, Victor Grayson sat down to supper with his lawyer and his patience and his absolute certainty that the world was arranged to suit men like him. He had no idea what was coming. But Clara Bennett, standing at that window, was already certain of one thing. She had survived 3 years of Victor Grayson. She was not going to spend one more. Cord Hatch came back the next morning with the look of a man who'd spent the night deciding whether to run and had stayed purely out of something he couldn't name yet. He knocked at Evelyn's door before 7 hat in hand, and when Caleb opened it, Cord said 2 words before anything else. Ruth answered. Caleb pulled him inside. Cord sat down at the kitchen table, and Clara came down the stairs and stood in the doorway, her eyes on his face, reading it. The way she'd learned to read men's faces, looking for the lie underneath the delivery. "She got your message," Cord said. "I slipped it inside the flour sack the way you said. She found it. She wrote back." He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, so small and tight it had clearly been hidden in a fist or a boot or somewhere equally desperate. He set it on the table. Clara crossed the room and unfolded it. Her face changed as she read it. Not all at once. In degrees. Something moved through her eyes. Relief, then something sharper, then something that looked almost like hope, except harder than hope, more specific. "She found the books," Clara said. Caleb leaned forward. "Grayson's ledgers. She knows where they are. She says she can get to them if she has until tomorrow morning." Clara set the paper down. "She says May is all right, frightened but all right." Her voice was steady in the way that costs a great deal. "She also says Grayson's men have been watching the camp harder since I left. 2 extra guards on the east side. Dogs loose at night." She paused. "She says she doesn't care. She says if we can get the girls out, she'll burn the office herself to make sure the books don't disappear." "We're not burning anything," Caleb said. Those books are our case. We need them intact. Then someone needs to get inside that camp tonight, Clara said. She looked at Cord. Is there a way in that the guards don't know? Cord's mouth tightened. There's a drainage cut on the north side. I've seen it. Wide enough for one person. He paused. It's not a comfortable approach. I'm not asking for comfortable, Caleb said. They were still working through the details when Hadley knocked at the back door an hour later with the expression of a man carrying something he'd rather put down. Grayson came to see me this morning, he said. Before sunrise. Brought his lawyer. He looked at Caleb. He's giving us until noon today. If Clara isn't in his custody by noon, he's going to the territorial marshal's office. He has connections there, and he knows it, and he made sure I know it. He pulled out his watch. It's 8:45. The room went quiet. He's escalating, Caleb said. He's not patient anymore, Hadley said. Whatever he was calculating before it changed. I think he knows we're looking for evidence. I think someone talked. He looked at Cord. Cord went pale. I didn't say a word to anybody. I believe you, Hadley said. But Grayson's smart. He doesn't need to know the specifics. He just needs to read the room, and the room has been telling him that this situation isn't resolving the way it should. He looked at Clara directly for the first time. Miss Bennett, I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer honest. If this goes to the territorial marshal, if Grayson gets federal backing for that order, is there anything at all that he could use to make your contract look legitimate? Anything you signed or said or did under circumstances that could be— I was 17, Clara said. Her voice didn't change. I know. But was there? I was 17 years old. I had never left my county. My father was dead, and my mother was sick, and a man with a nice suit told me I could help my family. She met Hadley's eyes without flinching. There is nothing I did that makes what happened to me legal. Nothing. And I will stand in front of any judge in this territory and say exactly that. Hadley nodded slowly. Then that's what we're going to do. What? Caleb said. We're not running, we're not hiding, and we're not handing her over. Hadley squared his shoulders. I'm done making the same mistake twice. Anna deserved better than what I gave her. Clara deserves better. He looked at Caleb. Can you get those ledgers? If Cord gets me through that drainage cut by nightfall. Then do it. Hadley put his hat back on. I'll handle Grayson until noon. After that, however this unfolds, we face it. Grayson sent Drum at 11:45, not to the sheriff's office, to Evelyn's house, with 4 men and that empty professional patience that was somehow worse than any open threat. Drum knocked on the door like a reasonable man. Caleb opened it. Mr. Turner, Drum said pleasantly. I think we're past the point of delays. Mr. Grayson would like his property. He stopped himself, corrected himself with a small, insincere adjustment of expression. His employee. He'd like his employee returned now, please. His employee isn't here, Caleb said. Drum's eyes moved past him into the house, the eyes of a man doing a fast calculation. I'd like to see that for myself if you don't mind. I do mind. They looked at each other for a moment. Everything that needed to be said between them passed in that silence without either of them saying it. Mr. Turner, Drum said, still pleasant. You're an old man living alone on a ranch that's seen better years. Mr. Grayson bears you no ill will. This doesn't have to become a personal matter. It became personal, Caleb said, the moment you rode into this town. From behind him. Somewhere inside the house, he heard Clara's footsteps on the stairs. He didn't turn. He held Drum's eyes. Drum heard the footsteps too. Miss Bennett. Drum called past Caleb. You're not making this easier for yourself or for the people trying to help you. Mr. Grayson is a forgiving man. If you come out now. She's not coming out, Caleb said. I wasn't talking to you, old man. You're talking to me, Caleb said, because she's got nothing to say to you. Drum's pleasantness didn't crack. That was the thing about him. He'd been trained out of cracking. He smiled the small smile of someone who already knows the ending and is just waiting for everyone else to catch up. Noon, he said. Tell her she's got until noon." He turned and walked away, and his 4 men turned with him like they were all one organism, and Caleb stood in the doorway and watched them go and thought, tonight. It has to be tonight. Moses Alcott was the first. He showed up at noon with his hammer still in his hand like he'd been in the middle of something and decided it could wait, and planted himself in the street outside Evelyn's house without anyone asking him to. He didn't say anything. He just stood there. Then Harriet Cobb came. Then the widow Margaret Foss, who ran the bakery and hadn't spoken more than 20 words to anyone outside her shop in 3 years. Then Reverend Aldous from the small church on the hill, who had the kind of faith that required action rather than just belief. Then the store owner Francis Pruitt, who people said was too cautious to take a side in a rainstorm. They came one by one without coordination, without announcement, drawn by something that moved through a town the way conscience moves when it finally stops being ignorable, slowly at first, then all at once. Caleb stood in the doorway and watched them gather and felt something happen in his chest that he didn't have a clean word for. Not hope exactly. Something more like recognition. Like watching something he'd believed in without proof finally show up and prove itself. Clara appeared beside him. She looked at the people in the street, looked at Moses with his hammer, Harriet with her age and her grief, the Reverend with his hat in his hands, all of them standing in the cold Montana afternoon, like they'd finally gotten tired of calculating the cost. "They came," she said. "They came," Caleb said. "I didn't think—" She stopped, started again. "I didn't think ordinary people did this." "Ordinary people do this," Caleb said. "They just need someone to go first." Clara looked at him. "You went first." He didn't answer. He looked out at the street. "Caleb." Her voice had changed. "I want to be the one. Tonight the camp, Ruth the Ledgers, I want to go with you." "No, you don't know the layout. You don't know where Ruth will be. You don't know which girls can walk and which ones will need to be carried." She turned to face him fully. "I know all of it, every step. I walked out of that place in the dark 3 nights ago, and I know every inch of it. You need me." He looked at her for a long time. "If something goes wrong out there, something is already wrong out there," she said. "May is 15 years old and she's stopped crying. That's already wrong." She held his eyes. "I've been running from that camp for 3 days. I need to run toward it." They left at dark. Cord led them to the north side of the camp property, along a route that kept them off every road through brush and frozen ground. Caleb and Clara moving behind him in silence. Clara moved like someone who'd been preparing for this without knowing it. Certain deliberate quiet in a way that had nothing to do with stealth and everything to do with conviction. The drainage cut was narrow and cold and smelled of iron and frozen earth. They went through one at a time. Ruth was waiting on the other side. She was older than Caleb had imagined, maybe 45, with the kind of face that had been through enough that it had stopped pretending otherwise. She looked at Clara for a long moment without saying anything, and Clara looked back, and something enormous passed between them in that silence, the particular language of people who've survived the same thing. "You actually came back," Ruth said. "I told you I would," Clara said. "Telling and doing are different things." Ruth looked at Caleb. "You're the rancher." "Yes, ma'am." "You've got a sheriff backing this." "Yes, ma'am." "And if I get those books and bring them out?" "Then Grayson is finished," Caleb said. "We'll have the documentation and 3 live witnesses and a sheriff ready to act. That's enough." Ruth was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "May's in the south bunkhouse. There's a woman named Dove in there, 2 younger than Clara. And a third one goes by Sarah, who doesn't speak much since last winter." She said the last part like it explained itself. Like Caleb didn't need more detail to understand what last winter had taken from Sarah. "I can get the books. Give me 15 minutes. "What about the guards?" Cord asked. "2 of them are playing cards in the main building. The other 2 rotate the east fence at the top of each hour." Ruth glanced at the sky. "It's 40 minutes past. We've got 18 minutes before the rotation." She looked at Clara. "Can you get to May without making noise?" "Yes," Clara said. "I know exactly where she sleeps." "Then go. 15 minutes. Meet back here." Clara found May exactly where she knew she'd be. The girl was awake. She'd been awake. She looked up when Clara appeared in the bunkhouse doorway, and for one terrible second, her face was completely blank. The trained blankness of someone who's learned that what you see in the dark is usually bad. Then she recognized Clara and made a sound so small and so completely broken with relief that it was almost too much to stand. Clara crossed to her and knelt and put her hands on the girl's face and said very quietly, "May, I came back. I told you I would. Can you walk?" May nodded. Her eyes were wet. She didn't make another sound. "Then we're going right now. Stay close." Dove woke at a touch. Sarah had to be shown the door before she believed it was real, stood looking at it for 3 full seconds, like it might disappear. Like freedom was a trick she'd seen before, and then she walked through it without looking back. 14 minutes. Ruth was back at the drainage cut with Grayson's ledger books wrapped in a piece of burlap under her arm when they arrived. "Got both volumes," she said. 7 years of records, every name, every debt figure, every transaction. She handed them to Caleb. He kept them because he was proud of them. He never thought anyone would be standing where you're standing right now. Caleb took the books, felt their weight. "Let's move," he said. They were 200 yards from the fence line when the dog started. Not a bark. A full alarm, the kind that meant a guard had found something. A shout went up from the eastern side. A lantern swung in the dark. "Run," Cord said. They ran. May was faster than anyone expected. Months of captivity and years of country living, giving her legs that knew how to move through rough ground without thinking about it. Dove ran with her jaw clenched. Sarah ran silent, like she'd learned to do everything silent. Ruth ran last, and she ran like a woman who had been waiting a very long time for the chance. Caleb ran with Grayson's ledgers pressed against his chest, like something precious, because they were. Behind them, the camp erupted into noise and light. But they were already through the cut. They were already gone. By morning, Hadley had the books. He sat at his desk with his deputy and Caleb and a man named Prescott, who was the best lawyer in the county and had driven through the night to get there, and they went through every page of Grayson's ledgers while the sun came up over Harlan's Creek. Prescott finished reading and sat back and said, "This is the most comprehensive evidence of systematic labor trafficking I've seen in 20 years of law. This isn't borderline. This isn't arguable. This is unambiguous criminal enterprise documented in the perpetrator's own hand." Hadley looked up. "Can we move on it?" "Today," Prescott said. "Right now. Federal statute, not territorial. Judge Alderman's preliminary order is void the moment we file." Caleb stood up. "Then let's go." Hadley put on his hat, checked his gun, looked at Caleb with the expression of a man who'd been waiting 14 months to do the right thing and was finally going to get the chance. "Let's go," he said. Grayson was in the hotel dining room when they walked in. He looked up from his breakfast, and for one fraction of a second, just one something moved through his face that wasn't pleasantness or calculation. Something that looked like a man seeing the ground shift under his feet before he understood it was moving. Then it was gone. "Sheriff," he said, "I'm glad you've come to your senses." "Victor Grayson," Hadley said, "you're under arrest. Federal charges of labor trafficking, fraudulent contracting, and criminal confinement." He placed the warrant on the table beside Grayson's coffee cup. "You can come with me now, or you can make this ugly. I'd advise against ugly." Grayson looked at the warrant, looked at Hadley, looked at Caleb. "You have no idea," Grayson said quietly, "what kind of people you've just made enemies of." "Maybe not," Caleb said, "but I know exactly what kind of man you are, and so does everybody else in this room." Drum reached for his weapon from behind the door. The shot that followed came from Moses Alcott, who had been standing just outside the hotel entrance with his rifle at his shoulder, since before they walked in, because Moses Alcott was a man who understood that sometimes you prepared for the worst and hoped you were wrong. Drum's gun hit the floor. Drum's hand, unhurt but shaking, went up. The entire room held its breath. Grayson stood very slowly. He set his napkin aside with the careful precision of a man trying to maintain the one thing he had left, which was dignity. He held out his wrists. Hadley put the cuffs on him. And Victor Grayson, who had moved through this territory for 7 years, like a man beyond consequence who had kept books on human lives like they were livestock, who had smiled while he did it, walked out into the morning light of Harlan's Creek in irons while the town watched. Clara was standing on the boardwalk. She was not shaking. She was not crying. She stood with her shoulders back and her chin level and her eyes on Grayson's face as he was walked past. And when he looked at her, and he did look, one last calculation, one last attempt to find the fear. She met his gaze and held it without flinching until he looked away first. Then Grayson was gone, and Clara Bennett was still standing. She would still be standing when it mattered most. The morning after Grayson's arrest, Harlan's Creek woke up different. Not celebratory, not relieved exactly. More like a town that had held its breath for a long time and was only now remembering it knew how to exhale. People moved through the streets with a different quality of attention, looking at each other directly, nodding with something more than politeness. The kind of mourning that follows a thing everyone did together that none of them entirely expected to do. May sat in Evelyn's kitchen and ate 2 full plates of eggs and didn't say a word, and nobody made her. Dove sat beside her and drank 3 cups of coffee and stared at the table with the particular expression of someone trying to determine whether the floor they're standing on is real. Sarah sat by the window. She hadn't spoken since they'd come through the drainage cut. Not a word. Just watched, absorbed everything. Held herself with a stillness that Caleb recognized from Clara's first days. The stillness of a person who has learned that moving draws attention, and attention is dangerous. Ruth was the one who finally broke the silence. "What happens now?" she said. She was looking at Hadley, who had come by early with Prescott the lawyer, and the two of them had been speaking quietly in the front room for 20 minutes. Hadley stepped into the kitchen doorway. "Prescott is filing the federal complaint this morning. Grayson goes before a federal judge in Billings within the week. The Territorial Marshal's office has already been notified the warrant supersedes any previous orders." He paused. "But there's going to be a trial, a real one, and Grayson's lawyers are already moving." Ruth didn't flinch. "Moving how?" "They filed a motion to dismiss before sunrise," Prescott said from behind Hadley. He didn't try to soften it. "Arguing that the ledgers were obtained illegally, arguing that the witnesses were coerced." He met Ruth's eyes. "They're wrong on both counts and I can prove it. But it means this isn't over quickly. It means testimony. It means some of you will have to stand in front of a courtroom and say out loud what was done to you." The kitchen went very quiet. May put her fork down. Sarah turned from the window. For one moment she looked like she was going to speak. Then she turned back. Clara, who had been standing in the doorway to the stairs, said, "When do we start?" The motion to dismiss was denied within 48 hours. The federal judge who reviewed it was a woman named Hargrove, one of only 3 female federal judges in the territory appointed 2 years prior in a decision that had scandalized half the legal establishment and been proven entirely correct by every case she'd handled since. She read Prescott's brief read the motion to dismiss, looked at Grayson's lead attorney over the top of her reading glasses and said, "Motion denied. We proceed to trial." Grayson's attorney, a man named Caulfield, who had the kind of expensive face that expected expensive outcomes, said, "Your Honor, the manner in which this evidence was obtained." The evidence, Judge Hargrove said, was obtained by private citizens from private property after having established reasonable cause. The ledgers were not seized by law enforcement. Your motion is insufficient. We proceed. September 14th in Billings. Good day. Caleb heard all of this secondhand from Prescott, who rode back to Harlan's Creek with the kind of contained satisfaction that careful lawyers allow themselves when they win something significant. "She's brilliant," Prescott said. "And she's angry." Reading those ledgers made her angry in the particular way that careful, intelligent people get angry quietly and completely, and with no intention of forgetting it. He looked at Caleb. "Grayson's lawyers know they're in trouble, which means they're going to come at the witnesses." "How?" "Every way they legally can, and probably a few ways they can't." The threat came 3 days before the trial. Not to Clara, to Cord Hatch. He found a note slipped under his stable door in the night. No signature, no specifics. Just 7 words written in a hand that knew what it was doing. Remember what happened to the man in Crenshaw. Cord brought it to Caleb at 6 in the morning. His hands not entirely steady, the note held between two fingers, like something that had bitten him. Caleb read it. Read it again. Felt something cold and deliberate settle over him. You're going to testify, he said. Cord looked at him. They're threatening you because you matter, Caleb said. Because what you saw and what you know is enough to hurt them. If you didn't matter, they wouldn't bother. He held the man's eyes. Are you going to let them win by scaring you? Cord was quiet for a long moment. His jaw worked. The man in Crenshaw, he said. Do you know what happened to him? No. I do. Cord folded the note slowly, put it in his pocket. He had a family. 2 boys. He pressed his mouth together. I don't have a family. I've got nothing much at all if I'm honest about it. He looked up. Maybe that makes me the right kind of man to do this. He testified. May broke down the night before the trial. Not quietly. Not in the small, controlled way she'd been managing everything since they'd gotten out. She came apart suddenly and completely at Evelyn's kitchen table, sobbing with the full-body grief of a 15-year-old girl who'd been holding herself together by sheer will for 8 months and had finally run out of will. Evelyn held her. Just held her and said nothing, because there was nothing to say that would make what had happened to May smaller than it was. Clara came downstairs and sat across the table and waited. When May had quieted enough, Clara said, You don't have to testify. May looked up. But, listen to me, what we have the ledgers, Ruth's testimony, Cord's testimony, mine, it's enough. Prescott says it's more than enough. Clara leaned forward. You are 15 years old. You have been through something that no 15-year-old should ever have to go through. You do not owe this courtroom your story. You don't owe anyone anything. May wiped her face with the back of her hand. Then why does it feel like I'm letting everyone down if I don't? Because you've been taught that your only value is in what you give other people, Clara said. Her voice was absolutely level. That's one of the things he did to all of us. Made us believe that we only mattered when we were useful. She held May's eyes. Your job right now is to be 15 years old. That's it. That's the whole job. May was quiet for a long time. Will you come sit with me, she said. During the trial. Even if I'm not testifying. Will you just be there? The whole time, Clara said. I won't move. Sarah spoke for the first time the morning of the trial. Not to Prescott. Not to Hadley. To Harriet Cobb, who had been sitting with the girls every day since they arrived, the way Harriet sat with everyone quietly without agenda, offering nothing except the particular warmth of someone who understood loss at the cellular level. Harriet was pouring tea when Sarah came into the room and sat down across from her, and said in a voice that sounded like it hadn't been used in a very long time, Will you come with me today? Harriet set the teapot down. Yes, she said. Of course I will. I want to testify, Sarah said. I want to say what happened. She looked at her hands. I stopped talking because I thought if I was quiet enough I would disappear. I thought disappearing was the same thing as being safe. She looked up at Harriet. It wasn't. No, Harriet said gently. It wasn't. I want to be loud now, Sarah said. Is that? She stopped. Something young and uncertain moved across her face, the face of a girl remembering she was allowed to ask questions. Is that all right? Harriet reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. Honey, she said, that is more than all right. The trial lasted 4 days. Caulfield was everything Prescott had warned, methodical, relentless, skilled at making the truth sound like an accusation. He questioned every detail, challenged every timeline, implied with carefully crafted language that Clara's account was the account of a troubled woman who had misunderstood the nature of her employment. He said the word employment 7 times in his opening argument. He said it like it was a shield. Clara took the stand on the second day. She sat straight. She answered every question in the clear, flat voice of someone who has already decided that nothing anyone says to her in that room is going to be worse than what she has already survived. Caulfield leaned on the railing and said, Miss Bennet, isn't it true that you signed this contract of your own free will? I signed it, Clara said. I was 17 years old. I had never left my county. I was told it was an employment contract for legitimate labor. Every word I was told about that contract was a lie. But you signed it. I signed it, she said. The same way someone signs a land deed they've been told is a lease. The signature doesn't make the fraud legal. Caulfield changed direction. Isn't it true that you made several attempts to communicate with your family during your time at the camp and chose not to? Something moved through Clara's face. There and gone. I made one attempt, she said. In my 3rd month, I gave a letter to a delivery man to post. She paused. I later learned that Mr. Grayson had a standing arrangement with that delivery man. The letter was never sent. Caulfield paused. He'd expected that answer to go differently. She could see him recalculating. No further questions, he said. Prescott stood up. Miss Bennett, in your own words, what was life like inside Victor Grayson's camp? And Clara told them. She didn't embellish. She didn't perform. She spoke in the same clear level voice, and she told the truth of 3 years with the precision of someone who has spent a great deal of time making sure she remembered everything correctly, because she knew that one day she would need to say it out loud. The courtroom was completely silent by the time she finished. Caulfield did not recross. Ruth's testimony broke Grayson's case open like an axe through dry wood. She had 7 years of knowledge, dates, names, transactions, the specific mechanics of how the debt system worked to keep women financially imprisoned, even when they weren't physically restrained. She spoke with the particular authority of someone who had watched something very closely for a very long time and was finally allowed to explain what she'd seen. When Prescott held up the first ledger and walked Ruth through the entries page by page, Caleb watched Grayson's face across the courtroom, watched the composure hold for the first 20 minutes, then watched it begin very slowly to cost something to maintain. When Sarah took the stand on the 3rd day and said in a voice that shook at first and steadied itself everything that had happened to her last winter, Caleb watched Grayson's lawyer stop writing. Just stop. Set his pen down and stare at the table. The jury was out for 3 hours. The verdict took 40 seconds to read. Guilty on all counts. When the foreman said the word the second time, May, sitting between Clara and Harriet in the gallery, made a sound that wasn't quite a sob and wasn't quite a laugh, but lived somewhere between them, the sound of something enormous finally being put down. Clara didn't make any sound at all. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and her shoulders back and looked at Victor Grayson across that courtroom with the clear, steady gaze of a woman who had just watched the world do something right, and she let herself feel it without apology. 23 years in federal prison. Grayson was let out without looking back. After the trial, things fell into place in the particular way of things that have been building for a long time and are finally allowed to land. Dove had a sister in Wyoming who'd been looking for her for 11 months. Hadley sent the telegraph himself. The reunion happened at the Harlan's Creek station 2 weeks later, both women crying before they'd finished crossing the platform to reach each other, holding on in the way of people who had started to believe this moment was never going to come. May stayed with Harriet Cobb. It wasn't a formal arrangement at first. It started with Harriet saying, "You can stay until you figure out what you want to do next," and May saying, "All right," and both of them understanding that what that actually meant was permanent and chosen and right. Harriet's house, which had been too quiet for 11 years, filled up again with the particular noise of a young person who was slowly, haltingly learning to make noise without apologizing for it. Ruth took a position with Prescott's legal office in Billings. Prescott had asked her during the trial, when it became clear that her knowledge of labor contract law, learned entirely from being subject to its abuses, was sharper than that of most practicing attorneys. She looked at him with those careful eyes and said, "I don't have a law degree." "No," Prescott said. "But you know things law school doesn't teach. I'll pay you fairly. You'll pay me the same as the men in that office, or I don't come." Prescott looked at her for a moment. "Fair enough," he said. Sarah went with Evelyn, not officially. Evelyn hadn't planned it. But Sarah had started helping in the medical office, handing instruments, taking temperatures, sitting with patients who were frightened in the particular steady way that Sarah had mastered through necessity. And one evening, she simply didn't leave, and Evelyn didn't suggest she should, and that was that. Two women who had learned to be useful through survival, finding that the same skill had a different quality entirely when it was freely chosen. Clara went to the ranch. Caleb didn't ask her. He offered it the way he'd offered everything since the cabin, without condition, without expectation, with the simple directness of a man who meant what he said. "There's a room upstairs with a lock on the door," he said. "Has its own key. You keep it." He looked at her. "There's a horse in the barn, the bay mare. She responds well. She's yours to ride whenever you want." He paused. "The work is there if you want it, and not there if you don't. I won't ask anything of you." Clara looked at him for a long moment. "Why?" she said. It was the same question she'd asked in the cabin the first night. The question she kept coming back to because she hadn't yet fully absorbed the answer. "Because you need somewhere solid to stand while you figure out the rest," he said. "And I've got solid ground to spare." She moved in on a Tuesday. The first week was the hardest, not because anything happened, because nothing happened. Because the days were quiet and unhurried, and nobody needed anything from her, and she didn't know what to do with that. She woke up the first morning at 4 a.m., with her heart going fast, ready for something. The sound of boots, a locked door, a voice telling her what she owed, and there was nothing. Just the dark and the quiet of a house that felt safe, and the very strange, deeply unfamiliar sensation of not being afraid. She got up and went downstairs and found Caleb already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee the way she later learned he was every morning. He looked up when she came in. Didn't ask why she was up at 4. Just reached for the coffee pot and filled a second cup and slid it across the table. She sat down. They didn't speak for a long time. "Does it get easier?" she said finally. "The waking up afraid. I thought about it honestly. It gets less frequent. For a while it gets worse before it gets better. Then one morning you wake up and you're just awake. Just yourself. Nothing chasing you." He looked at his cup. "Took me about 8 months after Ruth died. I don't know that it's the same kind of hard, but it's a different shape of the same thing," she said. "Maybe." She drank her coffee. Outside the sky was beginning to change. "I want to work," she said. "I'm not good at doing nothing. It makes the quiet louder." "The fence on the east side needs mending," he said. "And the books for the ranch haven't been properly kept in 2 years. I've been guessing at the numbers and hoping for the best." Something that might have been the very beginning of a smile moved across Clara's face. "You've been guessing?" "I'm a rancher," he said. "Not an accountant." "I know figures," she said. "My father taught me before he died. I kept books for a dry goods store when I was 16. She paused. "Before." "Then the books are yours," he said. "If you want them." She did. The weeks that followed were quiet in a way that had texture to it. The texture of ordinary things done in safety by a person learning to trust that safety was real. Clara kept the books and mended the east fence alongside Caleb and rode the bay mare in the mornings before breakfast, and sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the mountains go from gold to purple to dark. She made mistakes, dropped things, startled at sounds that turned out to be nothing. Went 3 days once without speaking much to anyone, and then came back from it on her own terms, which was how she needed to do it. Caleb didn't push, didn't ask, didn't watch her with the careful, weighted attention of someone waiting for her to be better. He just went about the work of the ranch and included her when she wanted to be included, and left her alone when she needed that, and the consistency of it. The simple, reliable consistency of a person who did what they said and said what they meant was the most healing thing she'd encountered. One evening she said, "You don't ask me things." He looked up from this harness he was mending. "What things?" "About the camp. What happened. What it was like." She paused. "Everyone else asks. Not meanly. They want to understand, but you don't ask." "You'll tell me what you want to tell me when you want to tell me," he said. "The rest of it belongs to you." She looked at him for a long moment. "Ruth, your wife. What was she like?" He set the harness down. He was quiet for a bit. Not the quiet of someone avoiding the question, but the quiet of someone giving it the care it deserved. She laughed easily, he said, even at hard things. She had a way of making hard things smaller without pretending they weren't real. He paused. She would have liked you. Because I survived. Because of how you survived, he said. There's a difference. Clara turned back to the mountains. The last of the light was going out of the sky in bands of color. She was only now learning to simply watch without needing to do anything with them. I'm starting to sleep through the night, she said. Most nights. Good, he said. I didn't think I would again. I know, he said. I didn't think I would either. They sat with that for a while. The fire inside. The dark outside. The quiet between them that had stopped being empty and started being something else. Something warmer, something chosen, something neither of them named yet, because it didn't need a name to be real. Clara Bennett was learning ordinary things again. And ordinary, she was beginning to understand, was the most extraordinary thing she'd ever been given. A year is a long time, long enough for a woman to stop waking up afraid in the night. Long enough to learn the names of the mountains by heart, and know which way the wind turns before a storm, and which boards on the porch stairs creak, and how to read a Montana sky, the way the man who owned the land had spent 60 years learning to read it. Long enough to stop flinching at boots on the stairs. Long enough to become without entirely meaning to someone different from the woman who had crawled out of that drainage cut in the dark, with nothing but survival and fury and a borrowed grip on something worth fighting for. The ranch had changed too. The east bunkhouse, which had been empty since Caleb's hired hands left 2 winters back, had been cleaned and refitted and fitted with proper doors that locked from the inside. Clara had done most of the work herself, not because anyone asked her to, but because the doing of it mattered, because building a thing with your hands is the surest way to make yourself believe it's real. Caleb had helped without making it his project. That was the distinction she'd noticed about him in 12 months of watching. He helped without taking over, offered without insisting, showed up without making the showing up about himself. The bunkhouse had been occupied for 4 months now, 3 women currently. 2 more expected by the end of the week, coming up from a situation in Wyoming that Prescott had flagged a labor operation smaller than Grayson's, but running on the same model, the same fraudulent contracts, the same mathematics of manufactured debt designed to make freedom feel impossible. Prescott had gotten the women out legally this time, working with a federal marshal who had been radicalized, as he put it, by Clara's testimony at the Grayson trial. You started something, Prescott had written in his last letter. I want you to understand that the territorial legislature is reviewing labor contract law. There are 2 federal proposals on the floor in Washington that cite the Grayson case by name. Judges who used to sign off on those orders without reading them are reading them now. A pause in the letter then. One man cannot do what Grayson did as easily as he once could. You are part of why. Clara had read that letter twice, folded it, put it in the box on her windowsill where she kept things that mattered. Then she went back to work. May came to visit on a Thursday in early October. She was taller, or seemed it. She carried herself differently, stood up straighter, took up the space she was in without apologizing for it. She came in through the front door like she owned the right to walk through front doors, which she did, which everyone did, which was a thing. She was still learning to feel in her body rather than just understand in her head. She sat at Clara's kitchen table and drank coffee with the ease of someone who has learned to sit at kitchen tables without calculating the exits, and she told Clara about school. Harriet had enrolled her in the fall term, and she was doing well in mathematics and struggling magnificently with Latin, which she described with a frustrated precision that made Clara laugh out loud for the first time in a week. It's a dead language, May said. Nobody speaks it. Why am I? Because Harriet thinks it builds discipline, Clara said, still smiling. Harriet thinks a lot of things build discipline. Is she wrong? May considered this honestly. No, she admitted. Which is the annoying part. She wrapped her hands around her cup. There's a girl at school. She asked me where I was last year, what I was doing. She paused. I told her I was living at a work camp. What did she say? She said that sounded hard. May looked up. And I thought, yes, it was hard. And I survived it. And I'm here. She set the cup down. I don't know if that's the right way to think about it. There isn't one right way, Clara said. There's just what's true for you on any given day. She met May's eyes. Some days the truth is that it happened, and it was terrible, and it still hurts. Some days the truth is that you survived it, and you're here drinking bad coffee and complaining about Latin, and that's enough. May was quiet for a moment. Both can be true at the same time, she said. Not quite a question. Both are true at the same time, Clara said. That's the hardest part to learn. The girl from Wyoming arrived on a Friday evening. Her name was Jessie. She was 22 years old, and she had the particular quality of silence that Clara recognized immediately. Not shyness, not reserve, but the trained silence of someone who has learned that speaking draws consequences. She stood in the doorway of the bunkhouse with her one bag and looked around at the room, at the proper beds and the locked door and the window that looked out at open country. And her face did something complicated that she didn't try to explain and that Clara didn't ask her to explain. You're safe here, Clara said. Those are the only rules. You rest. You eat. You take whatever time you need. She paused. The only thing I ask is that you tell me if you need something. I can't know if you don't say. Jessie looked at her. Something moved in her eyes. Suspicion first, which was correct and earned, and then something underneath the suspicion that was looking for a reason to be wrong about everything she currently believed. How long can I stay? She said. Until you're ready to go somewhere else, Clara said, and not before. Jessie sat down on the edge of the nearest bed, slowly, like she was testing whether it would hold. She put both hands flat on the blanket, pressed down. It's a real bed, she said, like she was reminding herself. It's a real bed, Clara said. Jessie looked up. You were in a camp. Yes. How do you... She stopped, started over. How do you stop feeling like you're still in it, even when you're not? Clara sat down across from her. She thought about the question with the care it deserved, the way Caleb had taught her, not by instruction, but by example, simply by being the kind of man who gave questions the care they deserved. You don't stop all at once, she said. It comes and goes for a long time. But here's what I know: every morning you wake up safe, you're building something. You're building evidence. Evidence against the part of your mind that says safety isn't real, that it won't last, that it's going to be taken away. She paused. Eventually, you have enough evidence that you start to believe it. How long did that take you? Clara thought about the first week. The 4 a.m. mornings. The startling it sounds. The silence she'd needed that had slowly changed from fearful to chosen. 8 months to believe it most of the time, she said. 10 months to believe it almost all of the time. She met Jessie's eyes. I'm still working on the rest. Jessie looked at her for a moment. Then she said very quietly, Okay. Just that. Okay. The smallest, most complete acceptance of a lifeline that Clara had ever witnessed. She left Jessie to sleep and walked back to the main house in the early dark and stood on the porch for a moment, breathing the cold October air and letting herself feel what she felt, which was something large and complex that she'd stopped trying to categorize. Something that had to do with Jessie and May and Sarah and all the women who had come through this place or would come through it, and something that had to do with herself, and something that had to do with the man inside who was probably sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee and his honest quietness, not asking anything. So, Caleb knew something had shifted. He couldn't have said exactly when. It wasn't one moment, it was dozens of small ones accumulated over 12 months. The way a riverbank changes, not from one flood, but from the steady, patient work of water. It was Clara at the kitchen table at 4 in the morning that first week, and Clara mending the fence without being asked, and Clara laughing at something May said, and Clara sitting across from a frightened girl in the bunkhouse with the patient, clear voice of someone who understood what that girl needed because she had needed it herself. It was the books kept with a precision that had quietly transformed the financial management of the ranch into something he could actually understand. It was the way she talked to the horses, matter-of-fact, respectful, like they had opinions worth considering. It was the way she argued with him about the east pasture rotation firmly and correctly, and the look on her face when he admitted she was right. It was everything. It was all of it. And it was also, if he was honest with himself, and he tried always to be honest with himself, it was one of the things Ruth had valued in him, the particular quality of her eyes when they looked at him lately. Something warmer than it had been. Something that stayed in his mind long after she'd looked away. He hadn't done anything about it. He wouldn't. That was not the kind of man he was. Clara Bennett had spent 3 years having her choices made for her by men who thought they owned the right, and he would rather die than be one more man in her life who moved before she was ready, who assumed before she offered, who took without being given. He waited. He was good at waiting. The evening came in October, the way October evenings come in Montana, gold and enormous and cold at the edges, the sky doing the thing it did, only a few times a year, where the light fell across everything at exactly the angle that made the whole world look like it had been painted by someone who understood what beauty was actually for. Clara was standing at the east fence when Caleb came to check on the line. She heard him coming and didn't turn. She was looking west at the mountains going gold against the sky, and he came and stood beside her, the way he'd stood beside her 100 times this year, close enough to be present, far enough to give her room to be whatever she needed to be. They stood like that for a while. The wind moved through the grass. A hawk circled once and was gone. "Jessie's sleeping," Clara said. "Good. She's going to be all right." "I expect so," he said, "given the person looking after her." Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I've been trying to find the words for something." He waited. "When you found me in that cabin," she said, "I didn't think anyone was going to come. I'd stopped believing anyone would come. Not because I'd given up exactly. It was more that I'd reorganized myself around the absence of it. Around the idea that this was just what life was." She paused. "And then there you were. And you didn't treat me like something that needed saving. You didn't treat me like a problem to solve or a cause to take up, or a tragedy to feel good about." She turned to look at him. The last of the light was on her face. "You just treated me like a person." Caleb looked at her. "You didn't make me somebody," she said. Her voice was steady and sure, for the voice of a woman who has found the words she's been looking for and is saying them clearly and finally. "You didn't rescue me into existing. I was already somebody. I always was." She held his eyes. "You just stood beside me until the world remembered that." Something moved through Caleb's face that he didn't try to contain. Something that had been patient for 12 months and was now quietly allowed to be what it was. "Clara." "I know what I'm saying," she said. She took a step toward him. Not uncertain, not tentative. The step of a woman making a decision she's made completely and without apology. "I know what I want. I'm allowed to know what I want." "You are," he said. "I'm not doing this because I'm grateful," she said. "I'm not doing this because I don't have anywhere else to go, because I do. I could go to Billings. I could work with Prescott. I could build something somewhere entirely different." She didn't look away. "I'm here because I want to be here. I'm saying this because I want to say it." "All right," he said. "Caleb." She reached up and put her hand against his jaw gently, the way you touch something you've decided to trust. "Kiss me." He looked at her for one more moment, one last check, one last certainty, not hesitation, but intention, the way he did everything, and then he kissed her. It wasn't a dramatic thing. It wasn't the kind of kiss that performs itself. It was simply two people who had both lost enormous things standing in a field in October, and choosing each other with the full weight of what they'd survived, and the full knowledge of what it cost to be open again. When they stepped back, Clara looked out at the western sky. The mountains going dark now, the first stars appearing in the east. The whole wide Montana evening spread out in every direction, like a thing that belonged to anyone willing to stand in it. She had come to this territory with nothing. No name that anyone honored, no story that anyone believed, no self that anyone acknowledged as real. She had her name back. She had her story. She had this land and this work and this man beside her, and a bunkhouse full of women learning the same thing she had learned, that survival was not the end of the story, that the part after survival was the part that mattered, that ordinary days freely lived, were the most radical act available to a woman who'd been told she didn't deserve them. More survivors would come. She already knew it. Some would stay, some would move on. All of them would leave carrying something they hadn't had when they arrived. New laws would carry her name in their citations. The territorial legislature would pass the Labor Protection Act in the spring, and 2 senators would credit the Grayson case in their arguments, and Judge Hargrove would write a decision that changed the standard for labor contract enforcement across 4 territories. All of that would happen. But tonight, Clara Bennett stood in a field in Montana in October with the man who had knelt beside her in a frozen cabin and asked nothing except whether she could walk, and she looked out at the western sky, and she breathed. She breathed like someone who had finally stopped waiting to be taken back. She had survived Victor Grayson. She had survived the camp and the cold, and 3 years of being told she was nothing. She had stood in a courtroom and said the truth out loud and watched the truth be believed. She had built something from the ground up with her own hands and her own voice and her own absolute refusal to accept that what had happened to her was the end of what she was. She had not been rescued. She had been seen. She had stood up. And she was still standing. Clara Bennett belonged to herself fully, finally, and forever, and no man alive would ever take that from her again.